Welcome to the DGD podcast. As always, Robert Reynolds. Got a special guest. First off, it's Natty season, right? Monday, 7:30. Listen, we just had a show yesterday from a Georgia perspective about TCU, our opponent, and what better way than to do just basically out of the random blue show with our guy Colin Post over here from the HornedFrog Blitz on 24/7 Sports. First off, Colin, welcome to the show, my man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Like you said, it's Natty season, and although I think the Bulldogs kind of expected to be here, I can tell you the TCU Horned Frogs did not, at least from a fan perspective. So to be talking about the Natty and the Frogs at the same time is a privilege and so cool. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, the interesting thing is, when you look at the grand scheme of things, TCU wasn't even expected to come close to a damn playoff berth, if you will. Seventh in the Pac-12? I mean, not Pac-12, Big 12, excuse me. So seventh in the Big 12 prior to the season, and now here you are playing for a Natty, especially under Sonny Dykes, right? Sonny Dykes' first year, and here you are, right? It's just it's wild, right? Like we both had our own journey to get to where we are right now because both semifinals were ridiculous. They really were. But let's just get started here. So obviously this is a Georgia podcast. However, I need to know about TCU, right? We talked a little bit about it. Give us some insight about this makeup of this TCU team, right? I think everyone knows about Max Duggan.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a scoop. Give us a scoop.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is you talked about both teams, and when they played in the Liberty Bowl in 2016, there was almost this identity crisis for both, and Georgia won that game, and Georgia kind of turned into one of the giants of college football. And then TCU has kind of had this identity crisis for the last couple of years. They made the Big 12 championship in 2017, and then since then, we're just above 500 overall in the last 4 seasons. Fire Gary Patterson, which seemed unthinkable, and then you bring in Sonny Dykes, a guy who coached just a couple miles down the road in Dallas. So it felt like TCU athletic program when it came to football was kind of on fire as like, is this rock bottom? And then in just a few short months, they've risen kind of to the top of college football and are one of the coolest stories, I think, in sports all year. And so what's interesting, you ask about the makeup of this team. What I think is most fascinating about this TCU football team is that it is almost the same team that went 5-7 last year and didn't make a bowl game under Gary Patterson. And I don't, put all of that on Gary, but I think what Sonny has done is not only has he brought in some incredible assistants, a guy like Garrett Riley, who was named the top assistant in college football this year. That's really fascinating. And he has put guys in positions to succeed. You talk about Max Duggan. What people don't remember about Max Duggan is he used to be known as a run-only guy. He was considered someone who was never going to be an NFL-level quarterback and really just a utility guy, wasn't able to win games on his own. We see Garrett Riley now put him in a position to succeed based on his skill set. And I think that's a microcosm of what Sonny Dykes has done with this entire team. And so this offense, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, I see a couple of questions in the comments, but is fascinating because there are 8 or 9 guys on this offense who were here last year that had a career year this year. And obviously you might expect for 1 or 2 guys to do that, but for 8 or 9, it's fascinating. And I think you can talk about the defense too, but offensively especially, we've seen TCU just flip the narrative about what the Horned Frogs are about football-wise, and it's been really cool to see.
So while we're on the offensive side, Rubes brings up a good question. He asked, what offense are we facing here, right? Are we looking at some air raid, West Coast pass first, run scheme, different things like that? Overall, what is the offensive philosophy? So I'm going to let you take it over here. And what's the offensive philosophy?
Yeah, so last year in the last couple of years of Max Duggan's career, we saw a lot of designed runs for Max, and then he ended up scrambling a ton in his career because there just almost no protection. And so what Garrett Riley has started to do is turn this into a little bit more of an air raid by trying to bring more protection onto Max and hoping that in calling less design runs, hoping that he has to scramble less, trying to give him more time in the pocket or calling a lot of play action and allowing receivers to get downfield, which helps TCU utilize, I think, what is their biggest skill is that they are fast. And TCU is just, is faster than pretty much anyone. Even with the size of a guy like Quentin Johnston, he can still outrun people in the flat, which we saw on that little drag route. He took 76 yards for a touchdown in the Fiesta Bowl. And so
yeah, that was
really
nuts.
it's done. Yeah, super, just crazy. And so what he's done is combined that and trying to utilize Duggan's strengths. We see a lot more throw into the deep middle and deep left side of the field from Max because he really struggled deep right and early in his career. So that's been interesting to watch. We see Quentin line up and on the far left side of the field a lot more as the team's kind of main deep threat there. So that's interesting. And then run wise, I think TCU's at their best when they try to hit the A gap with Kendre Miller. He's a guy that really has grown as a running back, was kind of a home run guy as a as a freshman because Zach Evans was the main back, and Kendre's now turned into a three down and in some cases early in the season an every down back, which has been interesting because not only is he so talented, but the way that they run scheme for him kind of keeps teams on their toes, allows him to get in open space and utilize his speed. We saw him kind of break the Texas game open. And so I think that the bottom line here is what I said early, is that Garrett Riley and Sonny Dykes didn't say, let's bring our ideas completely into this offense and make players do them. They kind of looked at, what do we have on this roster right now, which we inherited? How can we put them into positions to succeed based on what they're good at? And then kind of utilize them there. And I think that has created a lot of belief and trust in the players on this offense. And I don't think that's I think that's a very underrated portion of this team, is that unlike the previous regime late in Gary Patterson's career, these players really trust Sonny Dykes. They really trust a guy like Joe Gillespie on defense. They really trust Garrett Riley on offense, as well as the rest of the coaching staff. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, no doubt. So Ruth brings up Zach Evans, and we talked about this yesterday on our show, man. How bad would that be to come to TCU and then, because ultimately you remember Zach Evans initially had, basically almost signed with Georgia, committed to Georgia silently, and then ended up coming to TCU. For him to leave this offseason to go to Ole Miss to find and watch the national title game with Georgia and TCU is just got to be just wild. So obviously, sounds like a solid culture established, as Roots said. Black Adonis asks, "Is Max a red shirt?"
So no, he was a class of 2019. He started as a freshman, sophomore, and junior. Dealt with kind of the heart issue that I think is kind of a national story now. His sophomore year. So this is his fourth year as a starter. He's officially a senior. He graduated just a couple weeks ago. But because of COVID, he does have one more year of eligibility. Obviously, he is foregoing that to go to the NFL draft. But yes, he's not a red shirt. He just only has the extra year because of COVID.
Yeah, to me, I find it interesting, right, that you have a TCU team, right, that has consistently been good, but it's just wild to see them in year one with Sonny Dykes. Just automatically just going to the national, obviously getting there. What's really surprising to me, though, is in a first year, right, and under a first-year head coach with Sonny Dykes there, the team, to me, appears to be extremely well coached. When I look at it, right, I go back to one moment, and that was the Baylor walk-off field goal, right? And that told me a lot, because that told me that not only are they well coached, but they're practicing and they're focused in on every aspect of the game, right? They value every aspect of the game, because when you look at it, Georgia fans know where I'm about to go with this. Special teams can cost you a chance in the national title game if you're not careful, right? It means you have to play all three facets. Kobe Pierce is a former long snapper for Georgia, so he knows it all too well. Now, Black Adonis asks, what's next after Max? Is it a rebuild? What's the TCU quarterback room looking like? Obviously after this, right? Looking ahead a little bit, but after this, what is the nation looking like with TCU without Max Duggan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Obviously, within that quarterback room, and even I think it was either ESPN or Bleacher Report kind of was talking recently about Heisman candidates for next year. And so a lot of people who don't follow the Big 12 might remember that Max Duggan obviously was not the starter against Colorado in the season opener, which that is just a crazy story in itself. But Chandler Morris, Oklahoma transfer, was the starter, and I think that was well earned. I really don't think that Sonny Dykes made the wrong decision there. And he looked great in camp in the spring and in the fall, but Max Duggan obviously had then a heck of a season. So Chandler Morris will still be on the roster, obviously, and then Sam Jackson, the third string, was a guy that I was really high on in the fall. He's a dual threat guy who can just absolutely sling it. I really like him. However, the TCU coaching staff has really, really made it prominent that they are going to use the portal this offseason. And I don't think that's necessarily to say we don't have trust in Chandler or Sam, but if you look at Baylor, what we've seen happen at Baylor is they allowed their quarterback room to basically get dismayed, and then they lost Austin Novosad in their recruiting class, and so now it's just Blake Shapen or bust, and they really haven't gone after anybody in the portal. And so what that does is two things. One, it only gives you a limited option, but two, it prevents any competition in camp. And I think Max Duggan will tell you firsthand that if there's no competition this fall, he doesn't have a Heisman finalist season. And I think that really shaped him as not only a leader, but as a player. And so I think a guy to watch is Sawyer Robertson. He just entered the portal from Mississippi State. I think he's interesting. Just kind of heard him come up a lot in TCU circles. He was a 4-star out of Lubbock. Did not get much attention from TCU originally, so that will be fascinating to see. And then I have heard rumors of a couple other guys, but they haven't entered the portal yet, so we're kind of going to wait to name those guys out loud. But I would say just bottom line is in the next couple weeks, I would expect a guy to commit to TCU, and we still might see Chandler Morris or Sam Jackson start. But to the question from Black Adonis, I don't think that a rebuild is in the question for Sonny Dykes at all. This team is returning a ton of talent, especially in the trenches, especially defensively. I mean, almost 13 guys that have started a game this year on defense are coming back next year. So there are some huge names: Kendre Miller, Max Duggan, Quentin Johnston, Travis Hodges-Tomlinson, Dylan Horton, that will leave or probably are going to leave. But you're returning a ton of talent and their best recruiting class in a long time. So rebuild, no. National championship again, we'll have to see. But, I don't think Sonny Dykes plans to rebuild in his time at TCU now.
So I know, well, speaking of the portal, right, I know y'all just actually got your 5th commitment from the portal with Trey Sanders.
Yep.
But also just kind of, I know this isn't TCU related, this isn't Georgia related. Sam Hartman has committed to Notre Dame, by the way. So if anybody's interested in that recruitment from the portal, apparently he has committed to Notre Dame. So that's interesting in itself, but obviously we'll leave that there. So Kobe brings up that, Max Duggan looks like he's heard reports that, Max is a day 3 guy, I guess, in regards to the NFL draft. Where do you see him fitting in at the next level? And also, would you say that day 3 is too low, high, or about right in regards to his draft stock? What do you think?
No, I think day 3 is great. I expect Max to go in probably the 6th round, and if they win the national title, maybe the 5th round. I think what's interesting about Max is he's always had intangibles that would make you a great backup. He's always had the grit. You see that his freshman year when they knocked off Texas at home. He's always had the ability to fight through adversity. He's always had the ability to be coached well. He's always had the ability to be a great runner, a tough player. So those things are all true. Was not an NFL talent, though, with just those. Now we're seeing a guy who's super efficient, never turns the ball over, and is able to finally throw a deep ball. And so I think that is fascinating. I think Max Duggan has a really good opportunity to make a couple $1 million over the next couple of years, being a really solid backup in the NFL. And look, we're seeing a guy like Brock Purdy, who's not putting up crazy video game numbers, but he's being really efficient. He's taking care of the ball, and he's being put in a position to succeed in what is a really good offense. Brock Purdy's walking into a situation that's probably one of the best in the NFL for rookie quarterback. And so I think Max Duggan will be that type of guy. And I see Rudes is kind of asking a good franchise. I could see him walking into a situation where a team, doesn't have a great backup, or it's just like already has a set dude and is looking for a guy to kind of just be maybe a long-term successor, somewhere like Kansas City, where obviously there is no idea of Patrick Mahomes needing a replacement anytime soon.
Maybe
but
Buffalo
a guy like,
too, maybe?
Yeah. And I think
He's got
Buffalo,
some
that's
good arm strength, right? He's got some good arm strength, right?
right.
And he can run, right? So, like, if you look to me, and if you look at Buffalo and how they're developed, and Kansas City is the same thing, right? The offenses they're designed, like, they've got weapons, they've got both starting quarterbacks have the athletic ability to run, but they can also throw the ball, right?
Yeah.
Duggan seems to have that, to me at least, right? Like you said, I'm expecting him to be a backup, but you never know, right, how development works. But
Yeah.
I think those would be ideal landing spots just from our perspectives because, one, they don't necessarily need a starting quarterback, but you want that. You always need that competent backup, the smart. I would say the smart, competent quarterback to get you win games in the meantime, if that will.
Yeah, definitely. And I think back, when talking about the national championship on Monday, that is a fascinating thing. Max Duggan completes around 50% of his deep balls. And if you take out, a friend of mine, check him out on Twitter, Statso War does advanced stats previews. And he was talking about if you take out Tarleton State, which kind of inflates the stats a little bit, he's still completing 47, I think it was 0.7 or 0.8% of deep passes. And then Georgia, one of their biggest flaws is that they're 80th in the country when it comes to deep ball percentage. I think they're allowing around 42% completion percentage on deep balls. And so Georgia's defense is really stout, really good, going to be one of the best that TCU has played all year. However, TCU's speed and Max's ability to be efficient doing that could be a real issue in this game. And if Max completes on a couple of those, especially if they're able to go for touchdowns, that could blow this game open. And, TCU being the best deep ball and home run play threat team in the nation, really, I think that's going to be a really interesting key to this game. And like you were just saying, a factor that I think will help Max when it comes to the draft and the combine process.
Absolutely. So I'll ask one more question. I want to turn it over to the defense a little bit, but Black Adonis's question is, what would you say TCU's Achilles heel has been this season?
Yeah, I think it's simultaneously one of the most impressive things about TCU's team, but has also been sort of an Achilles heel, is that they have been one of the best teams that I've seen in a while at in-game adjustments. They adjust really well in-game. The problem is if you allow yourself to get down 10, 15, we saw them down 17 against Kansas State and Oklahoma State. When you do that, that is really, really hard to get out of a hole when you play a really good team who can score really efficiently. TCU's defense has been really good, but when you let yourself get down by multiple scores to a team as good as, let's say, Georgia, it's really hard to crawl yourself out of that hole. And so I think that's been an Achilles heel of TCU coming out flat, and they've saved themselves a lot of time by locking down defensively, hitting some big plays offensively. However, we saw against Kansas State, Max Duggan spent most of that game trying to find his ability to pass efficiently. Didn't really find it, went to the run, and in the end, they ended up losing because they got stopped on the goal line. But I don't even think that game goes to overtime if TCU doesn't start so slow and get down. So I think that's been kind of their Achilles heel. We've also we saw Michigan early in the game, design a run really well to just burst up the middle. And when TCU allows guys to get in the open field in the middle of the field, that's kind of a problem because there are several guys on TCU's defense that do struggle with speed, especially in the linebacking core. And so I think that's going to be really interesting for guarding a guy like Brock Bowers, is if he gets switched onto one of TCU's linebackers that's on the slower, more physical side, that could lead to a 30-plus yard gain and really kind of blow that open.
Absolutely. So Rudes brings up a good point. I kind of want to talk about this too because the 3-3-5 defense isn't necessarily a typical defense in what you're seeing in today's college football world. However, it poses some opportunities, right? But it also it has a chance for exposure, if you will, too, right? With kind of looking at the 3-3-5. Rudes asks thoughts on the 3-3-5 against Georgia's run game and those big uglies that Georgia has along the offensive line. What are your thoughts on the 3-3-5 and how it's going to hold up?
Yeah, I think the nation wants a dog on the 3-3-5 because it's the Big 12. The Big 12 just historically gets dogged on defensively because they're, it's high-flying offenses, people putting up a bunch of points. I think the best, answer to that for a long time was just, we're better offense than y'all, so it doesn't really matter. It was hard to kind of tell. Well, we go into the Fiesta Bowl, and that was a huge question. TCU's defense has a light box up front, and Donovan Edwards is not only physical, but he's running behind the best offensive line in the country, and he's faster than anyone on the field. Very first play of the game, Michigan lines up tight end right behind J.J. McCarthy, blow open a hole in the middle, and Donovan Edwards takes it for a huge gain. So it was kind of like, okay, are they going to be able to do this all game? But I think what's really, really interesting is that TCU really dominated that game for the rest of the game, held Michigan 60 yards under their average on the ground. They gave up 4 sacks to the same dude. Dylan Horton just absolutely obliterated the Michigan offensive line on Saturday. And so that, combined with the fact that I don't think Georgia's run offense is very impressive really at all. I think Kenny McIntosh is a talented guy. I don't mean to dog on him, but no pun intended. But I think Georgia's passing offense, they're a pass-first offense. And so we could see them try to exploit the 3-3-5, but I think it's a little bit less exploitable than a lot of people think. And I think that's really credited to, one, I think Joe Gillespie understands that that's a weakness and has, built his offense or defense to try to push people towards the sidelines. And then that gives you that third defender to make a tackle, even when your speed is kind of an issue. And then 2, TCU's linebacking core is really good. And though a couple of them on the slower end, guys like D. Winters, Johnny Hodges are really, really intelligent guys who make the right play every time. D. Winters is probably one of the most athletic and fast linebackers that's ever played at TCU. And so, yeah, I think there is a natural weakness there by defense, but I think TCU makes up for it with their speed. And personally, I don't see Georgia's run offense as something that's a huge fear for me in this game. I'm a lot more scared of the Bowers versus linebacker matchup and Stetson's dynamic ability to extend plays with his legs.
One of the things about the 3-5, though, Colin, for me is to talk to your point, right? You talked about the passing game and things like that, and trying to exploit mismatches, right? Todd Monken is a damn wizard when it comes to trying to scheme to open up and show these, exploit these mismatches, right? Against Ohio State, we saw Arian Smith, in the slot, right? And then now not the 76-yard touchdown, but early in the game, right? Eichenberg, one of the linebackers for Ohio State, ends up having to guard him because of the schematics, and it just created an instant nightmare for Ohio State. It's a deep shot, right? So I'm looking at situations where you're going to see offensively Georgia tries to find a way to exploit that, but I do think that Georgia has to find a way to get some momentum in the running game as well. In my opinion, because of the slants of the 3-5, right? I would, if I'm Georgia, I'm going to look to try to run some counter because of you're trying to wall off some guys that are slanting anyway, right? So I think counter could be there if you're a Georgia fan trying to run the game. But at the same time, you talked about the team speed for TCU, and honestly, against Michigan, we saw a brand of physicality that I hadn't really seen. At least wasn't expecting, if you will, right? Looking into this matchup, right, talking about the Natty, I think it's kind of it's going to be interesting because you have, like I said, you have Todd Monken that's been in the NFL. He's a schematic mastermind in my opinion. I don't think Georgia's opened the bag hardly to any of our beliefs, right, in regards to play calling. And I'm sure TCU is going to lay out all the stops too. It's your Natty. It's the first time you've been to a Natty, and the possibility of winning one since 38, I think, 1938. Yeah. So of course TCU is going to let it all out. The question though is, from a Georgia perspective, right? Like, how are you going to exploit the 35? Because Georgia's seen it before, right? I mean, we saw it last year against Arkansas, albeit it was last year, right? Different personnel. But Samford this season, now talent level completely different. Right. But the concept's there, right? The concept. So it's not something that I feel like Michigan hadn't seen the 3-5 whatsoever. So I didn't think they were prepared whatsoever. Georgia's seen it this year. So I think they'll be a little bit better prepared. But it's going to be interesting to see how Todd Monken, attacks that defense, because you have to, right? Do you get guys in space and try to make break tackles, right? Make guys miss. I think that's something that TCU defense has really got to come into play, because if you miss tackles, Georgia will make you pay, whether it be in the screen game or, whatever, right? But I also looked at the Michigan game too, and what really surprised me was Michigan was able to get behind the safeties on a couple big plays, right? That's interesting because I wasn't expecting that with a 3-3-5. I really wasn't. So is that something that TCU is aware of? And is that – obviously I think Georgia tries to kind of replicate that, but is from a TCU perspective, with the 3-3-5, is that something that's – I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily too common, if you will.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and it's something I was thinking about the other night is if TCU schemes so hard for a guy like Bowers or just like the middle inside, preventing any run game going, and then you see a guy like Arian Smith, like he did in the Peach Bowl, kind of get behind the defense. I think that could be an underrated factor of this game, where Georgia's offense actually, moves away from a tight end first because TCU schemes so hard from it, and then a couple maybe unexpected guys. I know Arian Smith missed a lot of time this year, but guys like that blow this game open. And against Michigan, I'm not sure if it was maybe got behind the safeties as much as it was, one of them, I think, what TCU has a habit of doing is kind of jumping on plays, which leads to big plays. Bud Clark with the pick six on the second drive of Georgia's.
That was beautiful, by the way. That was beautiful.
Yeah, of Michigan's offensive second drive. So I think that's kind of what we saw on the flea flicker, is that TCU kind of bit and was trying to prevent the run there, and the safeties bit, which kind of left Michigan wide open on the end. And so, there is a habit of that, and I think that's why we see TCU have some hard-hitting home run plays, because they jump on things quick and they're fast. The problem with that is if you jump the wrong way, getting back in position is hard. And so, I think you're exactly right. I think that is going to be a fascinating interest here, is if TCU schemes so hard to prevent the physicality of Bowers, et cetera. Will some faster guys get behind the defense and create some long plays or some long touchdowns?
Because I think ultimately, right, like Arian Smith, in my opinion, is probably faster than any receiver Michigan had. So I think that's something that I'm definitely going to be interested to see. But I do think, when it comes to TCU, I saw the physicality, right? So, you have longer corners, right? I want to say like 6'1", 6'2", if I'm not mistaken.
So it depends.
True.
On one end, Travis Hodges-Tomlinson's only 5'9", so he's smaller. But then Josh Newton is around the 6 foot range.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
but they're about all of them are about right 195 to 200 range. I think maybe with the exception of one maybe being 190. I think so. That's not that. So that's somewhat of an ideal size for what you're expecting, right? Like, so it's not like you're like 5'11", 185. You're not like that. You know what I mean? So we'll do a last question and we'll wrap this thing up, man. Black Adonis says, he also says that Arian Smith has one of the fastest hundreds in the nation, which that's key. But his question is, outside of Bowers and Stetson extending plays, what player, in your opinion, just makes you look at it and say, this guy could be the game changer for both teams?
Yeah, I think this game is going to be really, it's going to be about who makes the least mistakes. And I think what's interesting here is I think Georgia can afford to make less mistakes. So I think, interestingly enough, I think defensively is going to be the key here. Who steps up? When it comes to Georgia, I'm thinking about their defense and trying to figure out, man, who is a guy that could kind of come up with someone big here. And I think Javon Bullard is interesting to me. If he, gets a, they decide to blitz with him and he gets a big sack that causes a Duggan fumble, or maybe an interception. I know he doesn't have any on the year, but something like that. He's a really dynamic guy. I think that could kind of be a game changer here. And then I think similarly for TCU, if you saw, a guy that maybe is less expected to have an impact. So we know about the corners, we know about Bud Clark, but a guy like Abe Kamara as the safety, or maybe Mark Perry. Mark Perry is a really great tackler, but has dropped a lot of interceptions in the last 2 games for TCU. So I think guys like that stepping up and making plays that maybe they haven't been able to complete this year, but they've been on the cusp of, that will be fascinating to see. And that could kind of have a game changer. I think a guy, we're talking about fast guys. I think Darius Davis for TCU, if he's able to rip off a 40-yard punt return, even if he doesn't go for a touchdown, that will be huge for setting up TCU's offense. And then I would have said Smith before, to answer Black Adonis's question. I think Smith is fascinating because he has just not been around a lot of this season, yet now he brings this speed, deep threat to Georgia right at the last minute. And so harder to scheme for that, a lot less tape. And so we'll have to see what Joe Gillespie's ready for, along with the guys we've already talked about.
See, I'm looking at Kamara as a potential problem for Georgia's offense. The reason why I say that is because I watched Kamara sniff out a wide receiver screen that Michigan did toward the goal line. And it was beautiful. And it reminded me of something I would see on Georgia's team, right? Like, he's prepared. He's prepared for this game. He called it out. He was like, hey, this is coming. You can see him motioning to it. And then guess what happens? Receiver runs a little bit in, catches the screen. Before he even hits the ground, Kamara's got him wrapped up onto the ground, slamming him to the ground. So the defense is well coached. That's a perfect sign of it, right? I'm looking at Kamara as being a potential problem because I feel like he's fast, but he also has ability to cover. So I'm curious to see what our receivers can do against that. I'm looking at TCU offensively. I mean, I don't want to sound too interesting, but I think the X factor could be Miller, the running back, if he's healthy. I think that's the reason why. If he's not healthy, that changes the entire dynamic, I feel like. Because outside of that, you've got smaller guys, right, in size, but I feel like they're more twitchy and it kind of changes your offensive a little bit to more of a receiving threat out of the backfield. So I think obviously we look at injuries. If I'm not mistaken, he's questionable still. Yeah, I'm assuming he's going to try to give it a go if at all possible. I'm just going to leave that there. But I think for Georgia, another one X factor here that could be offensively is Darnell Washington. If he's healthy and good to go, that poses a big problem because now correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if TCU has seen a tight end as unique as Darnell, right? Not like with the size and the athleticism to go out and catch passes, but the elite blocking. His absence when he went out was huge for our offense for the rest of the game against Ohio State. We were spreading out, hitting screens, right? Kenny McIntosh had a nice 20-something yard catch and run off of a screen to get the scoring started for Georgia. And if you watch that play, Darnell was one of the key blocks there on the outside, running outside and walling the guy off. Mm-hmm. So if Darnell Washington is able to go, that adds a dynamic to Georgia's offense that I don't know if TCU can handle. It's just a matchup nightmare because you look at the 3-3-5 and you could have potential for a backer come off and try to stop the run in a blitz. Mm-hmm. But Darnell's he's athletic enough to get to a guy if you have the tackle coming down, right? So if you look at that now, Oscar Delp did just fine in his absence, but it's not the same. It's just not. Like, there's a potential that you could see him, if he really wanted to, play left or play a tackle position in the NFL and be a top 10 pick. Like, he's that athletic and he's that good at blocking. So I look at Miller for TCU, and I look at Darnell for offensive X factors. Defensively, like I said, Kamara, man, that kid is smart. And if I'm looking at defense for Georgia, I think you got to look at Kamari. I think Kamari Lassiter because it's going to be interesting to see what Kamari can do. Everybody thinks Ringo. However, I'm looking at it in a sense where I think you could see, these other guys, because outside of him, you still got some big bodies, but they're fast too. What is Kamara going to do? I would expect, Quentin Johnson to maybe get a little bit of a stack, right? Kind of get some, bracket help there potentially. But also, you see the short routes across, right, speed. So that leaves me to believe that you could see, a guy like Kamari Lassiter could have a big game, right? I mean, you could also look at Chris Smith as a safety. and help like that right there. But the DBs have got to come to play, right? And honestly, I think it starts with Georgia getting pressure up front on the defensive line and getting home and containing. Our edge rushers have to contain. You have to, because of the threat of Duggan's feet. You have to.
Yeah, I think just to close the Washington thing, I think the one comparison that I would say exists kind of within the in the Big 12 is Jatavion Sanders for Texas. And even though TCU really kind of shut down that Texas offense in that game in Austin, Sanders had 7 catches for 61 yards. So you're exactly right. A dynamic guy who can catch a ton of passes, is really quick and athletic, even at his size, does kind of provide a mismatch for TCU's defense. And I really expect that to be the scariest thing about Georgia's offense here. And so, yeah, we'll have to see about that. And that Kamara play you're talking about, I think, is one of the most underrated plays in the entire Fiesta Bowl, along with on that opening drive for Michigan, Bud Clark catching Donovan Edwards and not letting him go for a touchdown, which I don't think Donovan Edwards has ever been caught in his life before that play. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stories here.
With that being said, right, let's wrap this thing up, man. I know we've got a lot of stuff. Are you currently with the team, or are you?
I'm not. I'll be there on Sunday, so I'm getting there a little late, but I'm getting there early Sunday morning for the coaches' press conference, and then I'll do some media stuff all day Sunday, and then I'll be at the game Monday in coverage for HornedFrog Blitz. So
I wasn't sure if you were out there yet in LA or not. I know there's some people that's already working on getting out there. So, especially with travel plans, right? It's funky, but ultimately I look at it, I think it'll be a good game. I really do. I'm just, that you're hearing this David Goliath talk, but ultimately I think underrated. I think that's a little bit overrated. I understand the logic, but TCU's earned it, man. Let's be real. You weren't. I understand you weren't expected to, but let's be honest. You've earned it. And so I understand the comparison to David Goliath, but I'm just not a fan of that kind of comparison. I do think it'll be a good game. With that being said, though, man, hey, where can people follow you, man, if they want to follow some TCU insider information?
Yeah, so if you, the 247 branch that I work for is HornedFrog Blitz, and my boss, Jeremy Clark, he's been covering TCU football. He's kind of a recruiting guru for the last 2 decades. So he and I have a ton of stuff going up there, as well as the national desk. A guy named Dean Straka does a lot of TCU national desk stuff. And then on Twitter, I'm at Colin with 1L, P_3, and I have a lot of stuff coming out about the game in the next couple of days. So, yeah, definitely check that out. I'm really excited for this game, and I have a ton of respect for Georgia and the fan base and just the program. And so getting to play a team like that on this stage in LA, all eyes on us, it's just such a privilege. And genuinely, I have a lot of respect for Ohio State as well, but I don't know if Georgia has seen an offense this deep or this dynamic, especially if Kendre Miller plays. And so I do think it'll be a really good game, even though Georgia is for sure the favorite. No doubt. And the 2-touchdown favorite kind of makes me worried just a tad bit. But other than that, though, man, I can't wait for Monday either. Honestly, it's sad to see the season come to an end, but at the end of the day, when you're playing for a national title, you're so pumped. Sometimes at that moment, it don't matter. With that being said, though, man, hey, listen, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you for taking the time to come on, kind of give us a little bit more of actual insider information with regards to TCU. Obviously, Georgia fans can only do so much. We don't cover TCU like you do. So thank you for coming on again, man. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and good luck to you guys on Monday. Absolutely. Same to you. With that being said, though, folks, we will catch y'all later. We're going to wrap this thing up. And listen, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube. We'll be here Monday previewing the Natty. So come prepared, whether you're Georgia or TCU. You're more than welcome to come in. We're not going to say no to you. You can join the brigade on Monday at noon for the matter. With that being said, Colin, as always, thanks again. And have a great rest of your day, folks.